We're right in the middle of what people are calling a psychedelic renaissance. These substances, once totally driven underground, are now being seriously looked at as, well, powerful tools for mental health. But there's always been this one massive unanswered question hanging over everything. Are the effects a complete mystery? Is it just a roll of the dice whether someone has a good trip or a bad one? Or can science actually predict what's going to happen?
And look, that's not some old, outdated opinion. That was one of the top researchers in the entire field, Dr. Roland Griffiths, talking just a few years ago. For the longest time, the conventional wisdom has been that the psychedelic experience is just fundamentally unpredictable. But what if that's finally starting to change?
Okay, so here's our game plan for this explainer. We're going to start with that long-held mystery, then follow the scientific search for clues, and break down the two keys they found, something called states and traits. After that, we'll get into the juicy part. What predicts a good trip versus a bad one? And finally, we'll talk about what this all means for the future of psychedelic treatment.
Yeah, for decades, the sheer variability of a psychedelic trip has been its most defining feature. And for researchers, honestly, its most frustrating one. It's been a huge challenge for science.
Think about this for a second. From a U.S. Navy training film back in 1967, all the way to a 60 Minutes interview in 2019, the story has pretty much stayed the same for over half a century. It's a total gamble. But now that these substances are moving from the fringe right into the clinic, well, that answer just isn't good enough anymore.
And this gets to a really crucial point. I mean, when you're talking about treating someone's severe depression or their PTSD, you can't just cross your fingers and hope for the best. For psychedelic therapy to be safe, to be effective, and for people to trust it, we have to get past unpredictable. We need to know who a good candidate is and why.
So, let's get into the investigation. How did scientists even begin to crack this code? Well, they went looking for patterns. They started systematically sifting through years and years of modern research, hunting for those hidden variables that shape a person's experience. And this wasn't just one study. Researchers did something called a systematic review. They started with this enormous pool of over 1,600 different articles, and then they filtered them down using really strict criteria, all to synthesize the data and find the common threads running through all of them.
Ultimately, that huge search zeroed in on just 14 key studies that seemed to hold the clues. And by combining the findings from these specific, high-quality papers, researchers could finally see a pattern that no single study could ever reveal on its own.
So, what did they find? What was the big discovery? Well, the answer hinges on this really simple but powerful psychological distinction. Turns out, the key to predicting a trip comes down to understanding two different parts of you, your states and your traits.
Let me break it down. Think of it this way. States are like the weather. They're your mood, your anxiety level right now. They change day to day, even hour to hour. Traits, on the other hand, are like the climate. They're your fundamental personality, the consistent, stable parts of you that don't really change much. And it turns out, both are absolutely critical.
Okay, so with that framework in mind, we can finally get to the big question. Let's start on the positive side. What kind of person, in what state of mind, is most likely to have one of those positive, insightful, maybe even mystical experiences?
This graph right here, this is the heart of the whole discovery. On the left side, you've got the positive mystical effects, and on the right, you have adverse effects. Now, just look at the lines in red, orange, and green. See how they start high on the left and then drop way down on the right? These, my friends, are the predictors of a good trip.
So who has these amazing experiences? Well, it's people with traits like absorption. That's the ability to get totally lost in something, and openness. And maybe most importantly, it's people who are in a state of surrender, that mindset of being able to just let go and not fight what's happening. In other words, if you're naturally open and you can release control, you are primed for a positive outcome. Okay, so let's move to the other side of the coin. What about the so-called bad trip? What are the psychological warning signs that tell us an experience might become difficult or frightening or just plain adverse?
We go right back to that same graph, but now I want you to look at the purple and blue lines. See how they do the exact opposite? They start low on the mystical side and then they just shoot way up on the adverse side. These are the red flags for a challenging experience.
And here they are. But do you notice something incredibly important here? 3 of 4 biggest predictors of a bad trip are states. Being in a state of apprehension, feeling anxious, or being confused or just being preoccupied with worries going in, those are massive risk factors. This shows us that your mindset in the hours and days right before the experience is profoundly important. So, We've gone from completely unpredictable to having a clear, data-driven profile of who's likely to benefit and who is at risk. What does this actually mean for the future of this therapy? Why does this all matter so much? Well, what it means is that we can now draw a pretty clear line. We have a profile for a higher chance of success, someone who is open and accepting, in a state of surrender. And we have a profile for higher risk, someone who is resistant, anxious, or confused going in. This, right here, moves treatment from a gamble to a science.
And this gives us a clear roadmap for the future. Clinicians can screen patients way better, but even more importantly, they can work on preparation, on helping a patient manage their anxiety and cultivate a mindset of surrender before the session ever begins. And all of that leads to safer treatment and ultimately much more effective outcomes.
You know, we started this with a mystery that had baffled scientists for more than 50 years, but now it looks like we have the keys. We know that your inner world, both your stable personality and your mindset going in, powerfully shapes your journey. The question isn't really if we can't predict the trip anymore, it's how well. Which leaves us with one last really fascinating thought. If we can predict it, can we one day help design it for the best possible therapeutic outcome?